I am a writer, I am a politician, and sometimes, not very often, but sometimes the two do converge, and this book is clearly an example of that convergence. It is not a hastily dashed off sort of propaganda screed by an opposition politician. In my regular pieces, including for the Quint and for other publications, I have been raising some of the issues that are in the book. So I begin this book with the words, "I told you so," because in fact, I did point to this contradiction, and sadly for 4.5 years, Mr. Modi's conduct in office has merely borne out my concerns and my analysis.
भाइयों बहनों बता दीजिए, इस देश में कभी किसी ने 50 करोड़ की गर्लफ्रेंड देखी है? 50 करोड़ की गर्लफ्रेंड ये गरीब देश में?
I think in my constituency, for example, people who have said the most awful things about me, including in relation to the death of my wife, when they have suffered bereavements, I have been amongst the first to go to their homes and condole them. I think personal matters should be kept separate from politics. So it was dismaying. He was then the prime ministerial candidate of the BJP, but that he would say something like that. As you know, even then I didn't make a personal comment about him. I made a personal comment about my then wife, saying that she's priceless, and so you're putting a price tag on her sort of reflects more about you than it does about her. And that I left it there, and I think in most people's minds that was a fitting riposte and didn't require any further reaction. So this book is not a personal attack. I have indeed delved into personal matters in the introduction, but I've been very fair. For example, I have summarized the arguments of those who criticize his fancy accessories and so on. I've said actually that personal grooming is not something to be ashamed of. Similarly, I've revealed something that he told me, which is, to the best of my knowledge, he's never said publicly, which is that he says he gives away his salary every month to charity, his entire salary, and he's done that even when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat. I think that's a good quality, and one should acknowledge that. Here, I start off by acknowledging that out of respect for the electorate that had voted for Mr. Modi, I began by giving him the benefit of the doubt, saying maybe he really means it when he talks about Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, that he means it when he says he wants to be a Prime Minister for all Indians. But then, within 6 months of his doing that, I realized that is simply not so. And I wrote in the Quint in December 2014, there is a central contradiction in Mr. Modi's rule, which is that he says all these very liberal things, but he rests for political support on the most illiberal elements in our society. And I said that in this contradiction lie the seeds of his future failure. When tragedies happen in most democracies, the head of the government, let's say a high school shooting in America, President Obama is out there on television saying, I share the grief of the people, I condemn the killings, this is what we should do, and my heart goes out to the families who've lost loved ones, okay? When a techie called Mushtaq was killed within a week or two of Mr. Modi's coming to power in Pune by a gang calling themselves the Hindu Sena, who felt empowered by Mr. Modi's victory to go out looking for a Muslim to bash up. And he happened to be coming out of a mosque with a skull cap on his head, and they went for him with hockey sticks, and the boy died. And we got silence. Rohit Vemula's suicide, we got 3 weeks of silence before a grudging remark was made. The murder of Mohammad Akhlaq, allegedly for carrying meat in his hand that might have been beef, it wasn't. That murder got no comment at all from the Prime Minister, and one of his cabinet ministers draped an Indian flag on the coffin of one of the men who had led the mob that killed this man. Example after example. To have the most eloquent Prime Minister India has ever known, somebody who is possibly the greatest Hindi orator we've seen in our politics since independence, to be conspicuously silent on issues that matter to his fellow citizens, and where an easy opportunity exists to reassure sections of the community, the only conclusion you can draw is he doesn't want to reassure sections of the Indian community. He just wants them to feel vulnerable, he wants them to feel intimidated, he wants them to feel threatened. If that is so, then is that not a paradox? And how does that square? How can you have Sabka Vikas when you don't have Sabka Saath? Don't you think that when a government sets certain yardsticks, it should be judged by those yardsticks? So if Mr. Modi has people on his behalf, and he himself says, our government is too large and should be made smaller, and then he proceeds eventually to end up with a larger government than the previous one, then how can we give him credit for his diagnosis that our government is too large? If at all they're to have a chance of coming back to power, it will only be through a coalition, because there's no way that the BJP is going to win an absolute majority in 2019. Just look up and down at the states they won last time. Well, look, I mean, the fact is that the Prime Minister of a country is always fair game for critics, writers, opposition MPs. I don't think that I'm being too presumptuous in taking him on, because he does represent in many ways what it is about the BJP that we are opposing.